Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Members of the council, it's my privilege to give you tonight the June City Manager's Report. I'll just jump right into it. So first off, this month will be extremely busy for us. We have a number of activities going on, of course, most of them centered around the election. We have a couple of candidate forums. I'm sure most of you are very familiar with them. I just put them on here for the benefit of the public as well. But we want to remind everyone about the election, which will be held in Auditorium Room 201 on the 12th of this month from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. There are a number of other meetings, business meetings for the city as well. We have the Gathering Place meeting, which will be held in Oak Park at 6:30. I'll touch on that just a little bit later in the presentation. We have 2 budget workshops this month as well. The first one will be held from 4 to 6:30 in Auditorium Room 203 on the 14th, and then the follow-up to that will be on the 21st, same location, same time. The council reorganization meeting will occur at 6:30 p.m. on the 26th. Planning Commission's just the day prior to that, as typical on Monday. And then we have no 2 committee of the whole meetings this month, just 1, and that will be on the 27th of this month. The council reorganization meeting had typically had a committee of the whole meeting that happened right after that, but that got scratched in last year's schedule. So we'll try to squeeze all of that into the committee of the whole meeting.
Sure. As soon as I'm gone, you cut the meetings in half. Thank you for that.
You bet. And then finally, there's the annual pay plan meeting, which will occur here in council chambers on the 28th of the month. We felt like June was so full of activities and that it was such a draw for council members that essentially we've decided to postpone the council orientation until July. So we'll try to find a date that we can squeeze that in. We really wanted to try to get a new council orientation in prior to the new council members and mayor taking office, but we just can't find the time for it. So we just have to wait on that and try to work it in July. With that, we'll move forward. And as you may know, we are a lot of our time has been spent more and more on the budget lately. We've been working diligently as a team to pull numbers and look at budgets and expenses and all those sorts of things. As I mentioned, the budget workshops on the 14th and 21st will go into excruciating detail about this year's budget. A couple things that we're looking at include the incorporation of forecasting, which we have started last year and have continued through this year, and the last couple of months have really stepped up with regard to projection modeling. So we'll be presenting some of that information to you to get a longer-term view of the city's operations and its revenue expense projections. We're also working with staff diligently to look at needs-based budgets for the operations side of things. You'll hear a lot about our sales tax revenues and our property tax revenues and the relationship between the two, and the needs to continue to be diligent about those numbers. We also need to incorporate NAWS revenue projections. As you may know, NAWS was postponed for quite a while, and the city stopped putting money towards it. Now that it is shaking loose, is essentially a project that needs to be completed, and so we need to generate income or revenue for that, or reallocate existing revenues for NAWS. That will be a huge challenge for us. I'll share with you in just a minute what I mean by that. And then flood control financing is front and center right now. As you know, we are working very hard with others around the community, including the Source River Joint Board on advancing the flood control projects. So that's obviously going to be another financial strain on our budgets. With the projections, I just wanted to let you know that all departments have been directed to develop a 5-year personnel operation, maintenance, and capital program plan. And this is the information that's being fed into the projection models that we're developing right now. We are prioritizing in those models, essentially, as I mentioned, the needs of the city going forward. I can tell you the preliminary results, at least at this point in time, are concerning, but not surprising. I mentioned to you last year, based on some of this preliminary work, that we are going to be in a period of correction, a several-year period of correction, and this is the second year of that correction. Future revenues are not adequate to cover future expenses at this point in time, and that needs to be addressed. More of the details around these issues will be shared with you at the budget workshops going forward. But just to tease you a little bit, you've seen this graph before. I shared it with you last year. This is sales tax revenue loss Really, we've shown the whole period from 2007 to 17. But if you look at just 2014 to 2017, we've lost $1.2 million between those 2 years. The following year, between 15 and 16, we lost another 6.2, and then the year after that, we lost another $9.2 million. So collectively, that 3-year period, just the last 3 years alone, have equated to a loss of revenue of $16.6 million. And just to give you some comparison as to what that means, the city's FY17 property tax collections was about $17.9 million. These are significant revenue shortfalls. Add to that the devaluation of last year of property values by about average of 8%, and this year's projected devaluation of another 3%. And you can see that we're headed for, again, another difficult budget year. This is what the sales tax allocations look like. You've seen this before. This year, for FY18, that 30% of the second penny, which was being used for community facilities funding, has been reverted to flood control. However, because we have to find new revenue for NAWS, if we take that out of the second penny, which is what it was intended for, we have to squeeze down all of the other things that are being financed currently in that second penny. Before I get to that, let me just share again one of the other challenges we have. We have essentially almost half of our entire city property tax activities being financed in sales taxes. I've mentioned this to you before. 53% of the 2 pennies goes to finance property tax activities, either directly in property tax relief or indirectly in activities that are normally covered by property tax fixed revenues. As I mentioned, in order to increase the money in the second penny that goes to NAWS, we have to decrease proportionally the money that's going to the other things currently. So that means tax relief would be down 12%, proportionately flood control. If you choose to continue to fund that as a major community facility for our community, that would go down 12%. And then infrastructure, which is like street improvement projects and those sorts of things, would also go down by 16%. This is big money. It equates to about $3.8 million of equivalent revenue that has to be either found someplace or cut. And again, that will be something that we'll be talking about during the budget workshops. Lastly, the other strain on the budget, I mentioned this before, is flood control. We're very excited about the progress of flood control, except for the bills. We're not excited about those. As you can see, phases 1, 2, and 3 are already underway. $80 million in contracts already let, and they're digging as we speak. There's another close to $12 million or so of projects going on around the town for flood control. So currently we have $97.2 million that are going to be expended in the coming years, recent years, 2 to 3 to 4 years to flood control. Just to let you know, based on the city's current capacity for bonding, using the half cent, we can bond for only less than $60 million. So as you can see, when we've been talking about this isn't a surprise. We'll need more money in the sales taxes, if that's the way we want to finance this, to cover the difference. However, Phase 4 has a dollar value of about $131 million with design and construction and all of that. So we're going to still have to find additional revenues to cover that as well. So these are significant expenditures that we're talking about. And we need to do a better job at identifying the cash flow of this project, or we're going to run into some serious challenges going forward in being able to pay the bills on it. So that will also be part of the budget workshop. We won't have answers to the long-range financing of necessarily flood control and some of these other bigger things, but they will be part of the context of the conversation. I'll move on. You know last year that we did have a tax increase that caught the attention of our legislature, and they asked Minot as well as about 6 other cities to come in and chat with the Interim Legislative Taxation Committee to talk about what was behind the increase, sort of what went into it and how we moved through that process and so on and so forth. And you all know the story. I've stated it many times. It was written up nicely in the paper several times as well. So I shared with them the reasons for the increase. They were interested in our use of special assessments. Obviously, that's getting a lot of attention statewide. It's actually a campaign issue in some elections around the state. I can tell you that it is a very big concern for our legislature right now. They are contemplating seriously legislation for curbing or closely constraining special assessment use throughout the state. Fortunately, right now, less than $2 million or so comes to the city in total revenue from special assessments. It's not really a source of revenue that we really use very much. And there are reasons behind that. But there are other cities where that can be 40% of their revenue, for example, or 10 or 20 or 30 times more what we get in revenue for special assessments. Finally, they were interested in financial transparency, which we were able to allay any concerns they may have. In our case, the truth in taxation concerns that they have. They were very impressed with what we've done in Minot as it relates to our communication, both social media use, our newsletters, our editorials, our working with the newspaper, as well as just getting the message out, both in council meetings, public meetings, budget workshops, and so on and so forth. So I think the feedback by and large from the committee seemed to be very positive, and I think we were able to build confidence and credibility in our testimony when during that conversation. Next, I'll move on to Hub City activities. This is kind of churning, another project that's churning in the background. As you know, we've been kind of focused on helping the broader base of cities throughout the northwestern North Dakota and others, take a closer look at the Hub City formula or the reallocation. Currently, right now, we are working on incorporating NAICS codes in revising that formula, which we think will give Minot a better and more realistic representation of oil and gas jobs in our community, something that we feel is disenfranchising us under the current formula. I'm also encouraging a revision to the growth impact periods so that we look at what oil and gas growth impacts really were and not just some arbitrary number because it happens to be convenient. We're revising population impact numbers as well, and we capture that by revising the growth impact periods. And then we're discussing the weighting criteria. And next steps are that we'll be meeting with the technical staff that are leading this project and the other hub cities to talk about these formulaic changes and to try to develop a united front that we can then take to the Energy Development and Transmission Commission as a recommendation that can then ultimately be developed into legislation that we hope will be floated next year to bring some sense of permanence and predictability to the hub city allocation so that cities can plan accordingly. I want to update you quickly on the parking garage. I won't spend much time here because this came up at the committee the whole last week, so there's not a whole lot really other to say than the arms are operational. We've fully deployed those now, so you have to take a ticket to get in and you have to pay your ticket to get out kind of thing. The system is operational, passes are being generated, and the structures are being used as intended. So we've driven by there and we have staff frequently visiting the parking garage to make sure things are going. This doesn't mean, we're out of the woods with regard to, having bumps in the road and that stuff, so to speak. But right now we're doing, I think we're pretty much on track for moving forward. Next steps on the litigation front, it's been pretty quiet. There's a lot of that stuff that churns behind the scenes, kind of the, collecting information and cross-checking and all that kind of stuff. So that's kind of going on right now. And then the structural assessment, we've just given the go-ahead for the scope of work to be launched. And that scope of work is going to cost us about $30,000 to deploy. And we are hopeful that we can get that done in the period that I mentioned to you at the committee, the whole meeting, which was an estimated, 4 to 6 weeks or so. Just a couple quick notes here. Sanitation, we had cleanup week just not too long ago. We had 335 tons that were collected at the curbside. 151 residents used the free dumping at the landfill during the cleanup. Calyx, interestingly enough, also recycled or collected 20,000 pounds of electronics household hazardous waste. We are going to continue this program into the foreseeable future, and we'll try to keep it as a twice-a-year event. So the next scheduled event will be sometime in the fall. We'll keep you apprised of what that date is as we move towards it. Speaking of sanitation, we'll move to the landfill. We have developed a focus group, as I mentioned to you. This focus group's about 12 individuals that either directly, indirectly, or somehow a stakeholder in the overall landfill discussion. There'll be several meetings of this, you might want to call focus group or advisory group. And their first meeting is going to be held June 7th, so later this week at 4:30 p.m. We are excited to kind of keep this work going, and they'll be helping along the way with regard to guiding staff in regard to community concerns and issues related to the siting analysis that's going to be conducted, and then ultimately the cost-benefit analysis that will come once the sites, any sites that are identified as possible will be evaluated against that make the most sense. Construction, I'm not going to go into great detail here. You have 3 handouts in front of you. You have a construction handout, you have an NDR handout, and you also have a flood control project update. Those are all for your benefit. I've realized this takes a long time to get through that stuff, and it's probably not necessarily the greatest use of time, so I've put it into written form so you have those available to you and can look at those. But just three projects just very quickly. The downtown one's going to be a little bit of a short-term headache for some folks. Unfortunately, we have to go back in and do a little bit of warranty work. This is good for the city because it's covered and it's free, but it's not great for the tenants and the business owners downtown because it's, again, a little bit more of an inconvenience. So we're trying to keep that to a minimum, and we're trying to coordinate that work against events that might be occurring downtown and that sort of stuff. So we're being very sensitive to that, working with the Downtown Business Professional Association and others. The water tower is taking shape. It just needs to be painted, and then the bowl will be hoisted up and attached, and we'll have ourselves a new water tower. It'll be 1.5 million gallons of storage, which will be great, and that will serve, of course, the Ramstead Middle School, and Northwest Minot, and help us with fire flow and storage needs. The Broadway Bridge is 80% demolished. If you haven't noticed, it's on track currently. We do expect that project to finish sometime late in the fall, and it is on schedule, as I mentioned. Gathering space, again, won't go into great detail, just a couple quick things. A substantial amendment. We did hold our required public meeting. There were no comments collected. We moved that on to the Housing and Urban Development, and that will sit until a decision is made. They've told us, pretty much within 45 days or so, they think they can get us a decision. We hope it'll be sooner. We think it's pretty much a no-brainer at this point in time. So we have every expectation that that will get approved here quickly. The environmental review, we found a way to continue that work by using the EPA Brownfield grant money, and since that's not HUD money, HUD did allow us to use that money to continue the project and not have to wait until the substantial amendment was completed, and therefore that money freed up. So we're actually using a different source, which allows us to do that work. So we're trying to keep the momentum around the gathering space moving forward. We are needing access agreements from several property owners in order to do this work, and that's in process. Lastly, the public meeting for the gathering space. We're going to begin conversations with the community formally about design elements. So that will occur at Oak Park on June 13th at 6:30 p.m. And the reason it's being held at Oak Park is because we're involving the Minot Parks District in the conversation, and we want to have this at one of their facilities and have their involvement. And of course, we think that they're going to be able to offer a tremendous amount since they're really the experts when it comes to parks construction and design elements and those sorts of things too. So that will be the first of probably several meetings related to design criteria. So all those things are kind of working in parallel. I'll stop there with any questions that you might have for me.
Any questions for Mr. Berry? Alderman Wolski.
Thank you, Mayor. Not a question, Tom, really just a comment based on kind of a continuation of a topic last month. We discussed the Burdick Expressway project a little bit, and some meetings came out of that, and I just wanted to say that I'm really pleased with how that has finished up in the last month. My great concern was that it get done in front of the baseball season and be ready for all the traffic that was entering that area, and so I'm really glad, and I appreciate the hard work of the contractor. Mr. Meyer, I hope you'll share that with him.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Mr. Berry? Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
City Attorney report.